I hear that question, what immediately comes to my mind is the word nature itself, the concept of nature. And like many other important ideas that we have, including the environment, God, okay, the idea of nature has a long and complicated history. It's also fair to say that nature is a construct of culture. It's an abstract term. It's usually used in contrast to something else. You know, nature versus culture, nature versus art, nature versus civilization, nature versus nurture, natural law versus civil law, that sort of thing. And so it really represents an attempt to distinguish one realm of experience from another. And typically, used in that way, it's a term of convenience. But it's dangerous because it can really obscure important connections and oversimplify the issues. So many people find that when they're talking about environmental issues, the word nature is not very helpful. It's only helpful in sort of generalized conversations, sort of as a way of schematizing things. And sooner or later you have to drop it, because it not only confuses the issues, but often can lead to abuses. For instance, if humans are, if man, okay, and I use the word advisedly, is considered to be a rational being and reason is superior to instinct, then civilization is considered superior to nature, because civilization represents an imposition of rational order on an otherwise formless and uncontrollable flux of growth. If women are considered to be closer to nature than men because they're less rational, because they're moody, let's say, then it's only a short step beyond that to say, well, it's appropriate for men to run things because women are closer to nature and they're less rational. Okay, and it's a short step from that to start thinking of women as property and to justify sexual abuse and other sorts of things that we know from history were and are still today very common. So that's why nature is a dangerous term in some respects. It can be used to justify certain, behaviors that we would consider wrong. A lot of us would consider wrong. That said, I think most of us, when we commonly use the word nature, think about the biological world. We think about animals, trees, the landscape, mountains, hillsides, soil, water, streams, and weather, and things like that, as opposed to, buildings and books and music and orchestras and the government and other products of human culture or artifice. Now, we in America, I think, also, because of our history, have a further refinement of the idea of nature. We tend to think of nature in terms of wilderness. We think of wilderness as the most natural kind of nature. Wilderness is supposed to be a place where people don't dwell. The Wilderness Act says man, again, used advisedly, is a visitor who does not remain. And the earth and its community of life are untrammeled. That is, they're basically not limited or constrained by human activity. Wilderness areas are not supposed to have any buildings or structures like, bridges or roads or anything like that. And if we think of nature as fundamentally wild, and therefore of wilderness as the most natural kind of nature, the most natural kind of landscape, then it's hard to think of landscapes like a farm country or a city park or even a backyard in a city as being very natural. They seem to be impacted or degraded from the wilderness state, and therefore we don't tend to think of them as part of nature. When we think about going out into nature, we think of going away from the city. We think of going toward the wilderness. We think of going to Mount Monadnock or the White Mountains, or we don't think of going to the park.
Right.
And therefore, most of us, I think, largely ignore or, at the very least, undervalue the kind of landscapes where most of us live. We don't think of the suburbs or the city as being very close to nature. Okay. So to answer your question in the most succinct way, when most people are asked where is nature, they would say nature is out there, as opposed to right here.
Right.
Okay? Now, as a thinker and explorer of local landscapes, I find plenty of wildness and life, animals, plants, growing things, right in my backyard in Cincinnati, Ohio. I find it very helpful to think in terms of wildness rather than wilderness, because there's plenty of wildness. There are plenty of creatures pursuing their own concerns with very little regard to mine. Living right next to me, we have deer in Cincinnati. We got tons of deer, and they're plenty wild. They run away when I approach. Squirrels. We have lots of animals, herons, coyotes, geese, owls in my neighborhood with all the houses. It's really quite remarkable. Not because it's not remarkable to them, they're just living where they can find food and shelter. But to somebody like me who grew up thinking about wilderness and having backpacking and mountaineering adventures, and to one who was always looking out there, to find so much life and wildness close at hand was really kind of a shock. You didn't expect it. So I find wildness just about everywhere. And in terms of nature, if you think of nature as the non-human world, or the more than human world, it's just as close as the potted plant on your windowsill. I mean, it's really close. We don't have to go very far.